All right, Yidden, we are on 21b, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis toward the bottom. We're in the middle of a discussion on the definition of the cunning wicked one, Rasha Arim. Right, this is Rabbi Yeshua who told us that a pious fool, the foolish pious one, that's the guy who takes his piety so seriously that lets a woman drown because she's naked. Right, that guy, the Rasha Arum, so the cunning wicked one, a woman who is celibate, and a guy who does like public self admonishment, what are they called? Where the guys hit himself in the back? People who hit themselves in the back. Self-deprecating. I was going to say humor. Self-deprecating behavior to send signals to others that they're pious and humble, when in reality they're not. So those four people, said Rabbi Yeshua, I think it was four, maybe I'm missing one other. I don't think so. They are Mabali Olam. They're like the vanity, the wasteness. They undermine all that's good. Because they're trying to be holy, but missing the point. That's all those four people. All four of them are trying to be holy, but missing the point. Now, the wicked, cunning one isn't trying to be holy, but he is behaving immorally by using the law to just straddle that which is legal, and in the end, mess somebody else over, ruin it for somebody else, but they can go and say, oh, I didn't break the law. That's what this guy is. As mentioned in our last class, only one of all the examples the Gemara gives is actually someone breaking the law. That is the first example, Rabbi Yechanan's example, which is someone who presents his position to the judge before his fellow litigant is there. And in that way, the judge already has preconceived ideas about this person, and it can't be undone. So it's illegal to do that. One cannot do that. One cannot present this case before the judge, before the other litigant is there. But what's cunning about it is that it's very difficult to undo. It's very difficult to take that mindset out of the judge, right? Once the judge has this preconceived idea, it gets stuck in there. So it's a cunning. That was example number one. Example number two is the guy who goes to a poor person who is legally defined as poor, by Jewish law defined as poor, because he is one dinar below 2,000 zuz, 200 zuz. He gives him a dinner, and by giving him a dinner, he no longer qualifies as poor. And because he no longer qualifies as poor, he can no longer collect all the gifts that Torah allots to the poor, right? Which he basically messed this guy over. Yeah. Because he could have collected food for the next month, next 2 months. Now he's stuck being not poor anymore. And this guy didn't do anything wrong, legally speaking. He did whatever is right. And then he goes off and gives his gifts to the poor, to his friends, to his neighbors, to his nephews and nieces who are poor, and gives them the gifts. So he didn't break the law, but it's cunning because he destroyed somebody else. Sorry?
And then like welfare, he was like, he's not rich anyway, but technically he's no longer on.
No longer qualifies for welfare. Now the guy's screwed. Can't do anything. Yeah. That was example number two. Example number three was brothers and sisters whose father passed. They inherit wealth. So we learned that the law is that the daughters don't inherit, but they get to be sustained. They get their livelihood from the estate. Specifically, they get their livelihood from real estate investments. Now, if there's not enough to provide for the daughters and give the sons their inheritance, so if they go to Bezdin, what the Bezdin does is they sell the estate and they provide for the daughters. So this guy, let's call him the lawyer. Sorry for any lawyers watching here, it's a joke. But this lawyer goes to the sons and says, look, before you go to Bezdin, sell off all your real estate. And now that you sold all your real estate, you have cash, your sisters can't come collect because there's not enough for them. And they only get to collect from real estate, and the real estate's gone because you sold it. So technically speaking, he did nothing against the law, but he just messed over his sisters. That was example number three. Now we're at example number four. This is where we are in the Gemara. So this is
number 3. Did it matter whether or not the father passed away? At what point the father passes away? Or let's say the father.
Well, the kids can't sell without their father dying first because they don't own the property until their father passes. Right?
Unless they have permission to sell it.
In which case it belongs to them to begin with. This is specifically the father dies and now it becomes theirs because they're inheritors and they sell it as soon as it becomes theirs without waiting for the Beth Din to tell them what the right thing to do is.
Oh, that's the triggering point.
Right? The Beth Din would have told them.
They'd have to get a formal declaration from the Beth Din.
The Beth Din would have told them.
But if they sell it before that, that's the point.
That's right. They sell it before. That's right. They sell it after. That's right. They sell it after their father died, so it technically belongs.
Because when a father passes, the inheritance laws kick in.
So that's right. The moment he passes, all the inheritance laws kick in.
Right.
Belongs to them. What they should do is go to the Beth Din and say, here's the amount of assets, here's the estate. There's 2 boys, 3 sisters, what do we do? The Beth Din would have told them to allocate X, whatever it is, for the sisters. But a lawyer comes along and says, hey, before you do that, sell off your assets so that they can't claim any money.
Right.
So the Gemara said that lawyer is the one who is the cunning, evil one.
Right.
Okay. Right? And we
you would think that they would
That whole scope of it.
that was the joke. I don't know if any lawyers are watching. What's the joke about the lawyers?
A lawyer
Oh
moves
man,
into a little town.
no.
Can't make
Who's
you can't make a living?
A lawyer, an engineer, and a doctor are arguing about which profession came first. And the engineer says, I came first because no one must have needed an engineer to build a teva. The doctor says, I must have come first because I'm going to mess up the joke. I'm forgetting how it goes. Now I remember. Okay, so the doctor says, I came first because God took part of Adam and made Eve, the whole fancy surgery, so there must have been a doctor around. And the lawyer says, I must have come first, because the second verse in Torah says God created the heaven and the earth, and then it says the world was tohu vavohu, the world was chaos and vanity. Who can create chaos and vanity other than a lawyer? So this joke I heard from Nat Lewin, who is the lawyer in the trial, the big lawyer in the States, who is Chabad's lawyer. He fought the famous case for the books. He spoke for the Rabbi. He represented the Rabbi. He represented Chabad in many cases about public menorah lightings, and he also represented Rabash in many other cases, high-profile cases in Chabad. And at a speech he gave at some celebration after they won the court case with the books, he said this joke. So I'm saying in the name of a lawyer, so don't blame me.
The truth is we only need
Anyway.
lawyers to protect ourselves from other lawyers.
We only need what?
Lawyers to protect ourselves from other lawyers. Otherwise.
Yeah, Jackie Mason has a whole spiel about that. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. 5 lines from the bottom of the page. Third word. Abaye says, 4th example of the cunning, wicked one. So he says as follows. Zahamasi etza, one who counsels another, limcher benachasim, to sell off assets that were given to him. So let's explain the scenario. And he's doing so, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, following the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So what's the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and what is the scenario? It says the Gemara as follows. The Tanya, for we learned in a Mishnaic age text. Someone is about to die. Now, there is something called matnas shchiv mera. So someone who's on his deathbed, because he's on his deathbed. So when he says things about giving away his property and gifting things, there's certain leeway. He doesn't have to have contract. You don't have to do certain things to indicate that you are indeed willfully giving away these assets, because the person's about to die and he wants his last word to be upheld. So he can verbalize to somebody else, I'm gifting you X, or I'm gifting you something else, whatever he's gifting. There's all kinds of details to the laws of exactly what he can and cannot say. But this person was lying on his deathbed, so he doesn't need a contract to transfer ownership. He can just verbalize And
even today too.
yeah, there's
Well,
that's right. There is such a thing that in secular law as well. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to make a comment in a moment about this in a second with respect to secular law and Jewish law. So let's just first get the scenario. So Nechasai Lach, this person's lying on a deathbed and he says to a friend, my assets belong to you. Vacharecha, and after you, Leploni to so-and-so. So he said it like that, and then now the guy's dead. He's gone. So we don't know exactly how much belongs to the first and how much belongs to the second. So in theory, of course, what they should be doing is going to the Beth Din. The Beth Din will allocate exactly based on the scenario, based on what assets are available. They'll make some sort of judgment as to how much the first guy gets and how much the second guy gets. But now what happens? The Yorad tradition, the first guy goes before they come to the Beth Din to allocate what they should take. Umachar, and sells off the assets. And literally means he ate, right? And it's a translation, meaning to say he acquired all the assets by spending it, by selling and spending. Let me just make sure I got that right. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Just give me 2 seconds.
But he wrote all that down.
No, nothing's written down. It was all verbalized, right?
So there's nothing to prove.
Okay, so well, let's assume that there's witnesses that tell us that they heard him say such and such. Let's assume that that's the case, right? Just give me 1 second. Right, bottom. Yeah, consumed it. Yeah, meaning he sold the profits and consumed it. Sorry. Yeah. So the first guy goes and sells all the assets and consumes it. So the assets are gone. I mean, he used it, he spent it. So the first opinion in this Mishnah text is Hasheni, the second guy, can go and extract some of the assets from the buyers. Because the first guy sold it illegally. The guy who died gifted to both of them. Now, the first guy sold everything. So, and the second guy's left with nothing. So the second guy can go to the buyers and say, give me X, whatever it is that he's entitled to. Right? Like a lien on, basically there's a lien on the property. There's a lien on the assets because there's another person who's supposed to get a gift. Following? Divrei Rebbe, this is the opinion of Rebbe. But it's not the halacha. If that were the halacha, we'd have no problems. The guy can try to do whatever he wants, but guy number 2 will still get what's coming to him. This is Rebbe's opinion. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Rabbi Shimon of Gamliel says, Ein li sheni ela ma sheshayar disha. Guy number 2 only gets that which guy number 1 left behind. Because the language of his gifting is, I'm giving you my assets. That's what the guy dying said. I'm giving you my assets. And after you to guy number 2. So because he said an after you, so it's only the remainder. And if the guy number 1 consumed everything, or sorry, guy number 2, you don't get anything. And therefore, says Abaye, the cunning, wicked guy is the guy who advises guy number 1 to sell everything and not allow guy number 2 to get anything. So again, he's not breaking the law because technically speaking, he did nothing wrong, but he's messing over guy number 2. So this is 4th example of someone who's cunning, wicked. All the examples boil down to the similar thing, which is he's not technically breaking the law, but ruining it for somebody else by straddling the law.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we have other examples.
If it were an equal situation, then I guess Rabbi's opinion would hold. Right?
It depends what the guy said.
No,
if the guy dying said, I'm giving 50% to you and 50% to you, then that would be clear, right?
Not even that clear, even if it were unclear as to the percentages, but number 2 was not considered a remainder.
In Rabbi's view, he's not.
Yeah,
Rabbi's view is that
number 2 would have a lien on it.
That's correct. So number 2, that's right. According to Rabbi, number 2 has a lien and he can go to the buyers and collect and take it back. That's right. But the law follows Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who says guy number 2 is only left with whatever guy number 1 doesn't consume. Because he said the word and after you. Because the guy dying said and after you. So only what guy number 1 leaves behind. Okay.
Is it not halacha that when a father dies, that the eldest inherits everything and it's his responsibility to distribute how he sees fit to his siblings?
Guy number 2 doesn't know. So, okay, so I actually want that you just reminded me. I wanted to make a comment about secular law and Jewish law in terms of inheritance. Okay, I'm going to make a comment. So, Jewish law has very specific rules to inheritance. Now, these rules are not just rules, like what a person ought to do, but you can decide to do otherwise, right? In general, when it comes to monetary issues, that's the case. First, the rule in halacha is kol t'nai sheb'mamayin kayam. Any condition related to money is considered valid. And the reason is because even though there's Torah laws as to how monetary transactions take place and how properties are split and so on and so forth, but when it comes down to it, all money transference comes down to the willingness of the parties, right? I have to willingly let go of my property, and then you have to willingly take the property. That's transaction, right? So if that's the case, whatever condition we set between us will be accepted, because that will define my willingness to let go of my property and your willingness to buy the property, right? Those are the conditions stipulated, right? So there are rules as to how the condition has to be written and so on and so forth. But that's the general rule, that all conditions of money and all conditions related to monetary issues are valid conditions and are to be upheld in Jewish law, even though Jewish law is a specific way of how to do things. So if a person makes a condition on a certain sale that's contrary to the technical law of Jewish law, that condition supersedes the law, because the law was only there if there's no conditions and nothing else, then the law is followed. But if the condition is stipulated, even if the law doesn't say to make that condition, then the condition is still upheld, because that condition, written properly, indicates our willingness to transact. And that's what it comes down to. I'll give you an example.
When you say supersedes the law, that
it doesn't break the law, because that's right, because the law itself tells you to follow the conditions. That's right. I don't break the law in that sense.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. By Jewish law, there are specific manners in which acquisition happens. Right? Different types of property, different types of manners of acquisition. Right? Through contract, it's called the kinyan. Through contract, you have to lift up the item, you have to go to the property and lock the door. Different actions you take that indicate acquisition of the property by Jewish law. And this is relevant because if, let's say, the property is damaged in the interim, whose property was damaged, the buyer or the seller's? Well, the question is, what's the moment of acquisition? Right? The property depreciates or goes up in value, who's the one who gains, right? Because at which moment was the acquisition? The classic example in the Gemara is a cow gives birth to a calf. Was it before the sale, after the sale? Well, it depends when the moment of acquisition is, right? There's all the kinds of details.
Right,
we have to get. That's right. So that's right. So you have to define. That's right. You have to define what exactly is the moment of transaction, right? So there's all kinds of laws around that. But then the law says that if a certain community, let's say all fishers, there's a community of fishers, fishermen, whatever we call them, fishermen, and they're in the fishing trade. They buy and sell fish, and they have a unwritten rule amongst them that a handshake equals an acquisition. So Jewish law says a handshake is an acquisition, even though technically they didn't do any of the laws about what moment is acquisition. But because the accepted understanding between all of them is that the handshake is an acquisition, it's an acquisition. I think it's called situnta, right? It's that community's rule about how they do acquisition. So this is an example of a condition related to money supersedes the technical law, because the whole point of the law is to indicate the willingness of each party. And here we know the willingness of each party, because the willingness of the parties of all fishermen is they shake hands. I'm just using an example of fishermen. It could be copper tradesmen, and whenever they, whatever their,
the law says this, but you and I make a side agreement.
That's correct. And the agreement.
We shake hands.
That's right. And we honor
what the law says, because you and I agree.
That's right. So we honor that agreement. That's right. Okay. That's correct. So the law basically is all else being equal. If no other factors are involved, we go to the default law.
Okay, so going to the default law, but the actual law, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I read that when a father dies.
Okay, so now, so let me get to, one second. So let me get to, now let me get to inheritance. When it comes to inheritance, this thing does not apply. Because inheritance is not a monetary law, it's a mitzvah. It's one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. Inheritance is done in X fashion. And a person cannot make a condition that undoes a mitzvah in Torah, that undoes a mitzvah of Torah. And the mitzvah of Torah is as follows. The oldest son gets double portion. The rest of the sons get a singular portion. So let's say there's 9 children. Divide the assets into 10. Son number 1 gets 2 portions and everybody else gets 1. That's the law. And the daughters don't get anything. They get, as we're learned here, they get provided for by the estate, which the sons are responsible to pay out, which is what we're learning about here, which is why you can find this loophole to mess over the sisters, which obviously what makes him a cunning, wicked one. Sorry? That's right. That's right. Now, that's right. Now, one cannot override a mitzvah. You can override monetary laws by making a condition on the side, but you cannot override a mitzvah. And because inheritance is a mitzvah, you can't override it. So how do you inherit then? How does a person inherit things to his daughters? He should want to do that, which is what many want to do. Right? So you have to write what's called a halachic will. A halachic will, because an ordinary will, which only takes effect after death, then it only takes effect after the mitzvah of inheritance has kicked in, which is the moment the person dies. The moment the person dies, halachic inheritance happens, right? So afterwards, you want to open up a will that undoes that mitzvah. It's a big problem, halachically speaking. So the simple, in most cases, it doesn't become a major problem because the siblings get along and they all agree to whatever the parent stipulated. And because that's the case, right? But that's not always the case. So in a healthy scenario where the children all agree and so then they themselves will acquiesce, making it a new transaction between them to follow what their father asked them to. But if one of the children decide, no, I want to stick to Jewish law, then by Jewish law, the will be thrown out. Because the will only takes effect after the moment of death. And at that moment of death, there's a mitzvah of inheritance. And the son can claim that mitzvah of inheritance and override his sisters, even though it's stipulated in the will, unless the person writes a halachic will. And what a halachic will does is it makes the will take effect one moment before the guy dies. And because it's a moment before the guy dies, it's no longer in the category of the mitzvah of inheritance. It's now a legal transaction. And when it comes to legal transactions, the person can do whatever he wants. Just like we're learning here, a guy can, on his deathbed, gift all of his assets to one guy, and then say, after you give to the next guy, right? So likewise, a guy before his death can say, I'm giving my daughters half my property, because he wants to. And a person can do that when he's alive, because he hasn't entered the moment of the...
It's not an inheritance.
It's not an inheritance, it's a gift. That's correct.
Yeah, like Abraham did with Ishmael.
That's right.
He gave the gift out
Before his death, that's right.
before his death.
That's right. It kicks in a moment before death. It's a halachic will. Anyway, so that's just something to bear in mind.
What a will, it's a gift.
That's correct. It's technically speaking a gift. It's not technically a will, yeah.
But the norm is siblings don't get along. That's the norm.
No comment.
No.
Yeah, it starts from the beginning of time, Cain and Abel. No, it's a beginning. It just keeps repeating itself. Siblings don't get along. We see it every single day.
It happens.
No, but
Let's reframe that. Lots of things can get in the way of siblings' harmony.
right.
So a smart man gets his house in order before anything happens, and that way things go smoothly later.
Why how come we've never adopted it if we know this? Right?
People do this.
We know this.
I don't know.
Why haven't we over the years adopted a tradition where I know I'm going to die, I'm getting old, I'm in my later years, I know I'm getting old, I know I'm going to pass. Why don't I distribute my wealth before I pass and not?
Many do. Many do. Many do. Sorry?
And then they end up living. They don't die.
Yeah, it all depends on the scenario. Some people have, there's all kinds of ways of stipulating. I mean, I'm not a legal analyst, but there are kinds of ways of doing this. There are ways of protecting yourself. That a person's retired and he lives off dividends of certain things while the children control the assets. But it's stipulated in the transference of power that as long as I live, I live off. There are all kinds of ways of doing this. And people do it all the time. And I'm just making this point that a person should understand what a halachic will is. It's an important thing.
Is this idea of halachic will, is that deemed considered a retroactive designation case? Let's say
It's not really
nobody
retroactive.
knew he died and now all of a sudden he's dead. So they have to go back and say, well, this kicked in the moment before he died.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't know.
In that sense, retroactive. It's only retroactive in
But
discovery.
that's a highly disputed.
It's only retroactive in discovery. It's only retroactive in discovery. It happened the moment before he died. It just so happens we didn't know about it till
It
later.
just triggers. But we don't know when it triggers.
It happened the moment before he died. It's just a question of
That's
us finding out what happened. It's not retroactive in that sense because it's written in the contract. It's written in the contract. This is going to take effect before I pass. So it's a question of when we discovered that statement, but it happened either way. Right? It's not retroactive in the sense of I'm making an acquisition that takes effect a year ago.
That's just discovery.
It's correct. It's retroactive discovery maybe, but it isn't retroactive. If I'm not mistaken, I once called the Vada here. I wanted to ask them to do a class on this here in Montreal. It never ended up happening, but to the best of my knowledge, they even have something or other that will help someone that wants to do this. Halachic will.
There was a case when a guy died, and he said to his wife, they didn't have children. He says to his wife, you're not getting a cent of my money. So when he died, she emptied the bank account, and she put a check in his coffin.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll stop over here. We're a little off, but tomorrow, so everything we learned till now is one category of wicked cunning, where the person straddling the law, not breaking the law, but using it in a clever way to advance his own self and mess over somebody else. Tomorrow, we're going to learn another kind of category of cunning evil, which is a bit different than I think more relevant to our experience, meaning these are all technical cases that either apply to us or don't apply to us and probably never will, hopefully. You know, the idea of giving a poor person a dinner to make him not poor doesn't mean it's not really relevant to us in our halachic experience, you know. Or I don't know, advising a son to sell off his assets to mess over his sisters. It's not something that's relevant to us. The notion we understand, straddling the law and technically being right while being not nice, that we understand. But the next cases, the next category of cunning evil, cunning wickedness, I think that those are things we're going to understand. They're going to be very relevant to our experience. So that's coming, God willing, tomorrow. A wonderful day, buddy.